Prynhawn Da, thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm really pleased to be with you this afternoon. This afternoon is going to be about the future and thinking about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I have not written a book, an inspirational book with a theory and a great story to tell. But what we do have in Wales is we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is also inspiring, viewed very highly around the world by many, many people. And we are writing the story collectively of the well-being of future generations. You, me, collectively, we're writing the story of the implementation of the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. So this afternoon's session is going to be about thinking about the future and how we support generations to come. Thinking about how we raise our horizons above the day-to-day challenges that are very real within our public services, and how we think about working together to implement the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act collectively. It's really timely for me to be having this conversation with you because, as Zuzu was saying, I'm just brand new to the job. So I'm taking the opportunity to pause and to reflect, to build on the excellent work that Sophie Howe has done as the first Future Generations Commissioner, and to understand where I put my priorities. So we couldn't pass up, as a team, we couldn't pass up on the opportunity of having such a cross-section of public servants in one room, not to be asking you for your views on how it's working and what we should be doing differently to make even more progress. So it's going to be a session in two parts, whereby I'm going to talk on a bit, and then we're going to have an opportunity for comments or possibly questions to me, and then we're going to break and do some table discussions where we really want to dig into what you think about what the solutions are, not just the challenges that we're facing. I should also say a big congratulations to Academy Wales, because I am probably their biggest fan, and I may have benefited more than anyone else from their programme that they offered. Way before it was Academy Wales, it was Public's PSMW. I knew it by the acronym. And they used to run summer schools then. I came to a summer school back in the noughties, I think it must have been. I've been to a winter school. I've been to Brussels on a looking glass experience with these amazing big corporate leaders from across Europe. And I was working for the TUC at the time. It was a fantastic experience, and I learned a huge amount. So I just think this is such a special place and such a special learning environment. I'm delighted to be back. I've also spoken once before, and this is my second opportunity to speak. So probably I've really benefited more from Academy Wales than anyone. It's such a great setup. I do remember, though, that Jo Hicks, who used to do Alex's role, came up at the end and she said she was going to ritually burn anything that had touched the floor of her bedroom in the student accommodation when she got back home to Cardiff. So I don't know what it's like. I'm not staying this year, so I don't know what it's like and whether it's improved. But I guess it's typical student accommodation rather than anything out of the ordinary. So I'm really pleased you're enjoying the session. What we wanted to do, first of all, is start with a couple of questions so I can understand and take a bit of the temperature of the room, because I'm new to the job, and sometimes I go into a meeting and I talk about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and everyone's like, we know about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, let's move on from what the Act says, let's move on to, how we implement it. But I sense we've got a mixed group here, so I just wanted to understand what your awareness is of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So we're going to use Slido for this, and I think you've been using Slido all week, and this is the first question. So it's a multiple choice question, and you are asked, how confident do you feel in your understanding of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act? Because there's a job to do if you're not very confident to do more. I've never heard of the Act. I could briefly explain it to a friend. I'm fairly confident in my understanding of the Act, and I have a good understanding of the Act. So if you could just select one of those answers. that would be great. And I don't know if we'll go on to the second question first, next, do we? And then we see the answers to this one first. Right, great. Let's see the answers then, if we can. If everyone's had an opportunity to answer. I could briefly explain it to a friend. I'm fairly confident. Oh, so fairly mixed. Have a good understanding of the Act. I've never heard of the Act. So a fair mix, actually, in terms of the legislation. And I've already picked up a little bit of that in speaking to people over lunch. So I will spend a bit of time talking about the Act and what it says for those who've never heard about it. So forgive me if you are one of those people who already knows a lot about it and is very confident in your understanding. But that's good for us to know. Could we go on to the next question, please? How much do you feel the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act influences your work? Maybe on a day-to-day basis, or it may be less frequently than that. I've never heard of the Act until today, so I'm unable to answer the question. There have been 1 or 2 times where the Act has influenced my work. I feel that the Act influences how I work some or most of the time, and the Act has had a strong influence on how I work and affects my work all of the time. Right, I think everyone seems like they've answered that. Let's see the answers. There have been 1 or 2 times where the Act has influenced my work. I feel the Act influences how I work some or most of the time, 31%. And again, a lot of people, just under 20%, it's moving. I've never heard of the Act until today, so I'm unable to answer that question. Great, well, thank you. That gives us a steer, because one of the things that it's my responsibility to do is to raise awareness of the Act amongst the Welsh public sector and the people that work in Welsh public services. And it sounds like a fantastic job has been done already, but there's obviously more work for us to do in talking to you all about the Act and what it says and what it means for how we deliver public services in Wales. I'm going to start with a little bit, if I could have my slides, please, that would be great. If you could go on one, please. I'm going to start, and another one, please. I'm going to start today about just saying a little bit about my own leadership journey, because I think, that can be helpful in setting a bit of context. So I am the kind of person who's never had a career plan. And I've worked in many different organisations. So I've just been lucky enough to move from job to jobs that I thought I could add some value and do jobs where my values were aligned. So I started off in London local government, then moved on to the third sector, working for the TUC, working for Stonewall, in campaigning and policy roles, working for the Big Lottery Fund, and ended up until very recently, being the chief executive of Cwmpas, which was formerly the Wales Cooperative Centre. And for me, that's been a fantastic journey of opportunities taken and the ability to be making change and making a difference in life in Wales primarily, but prior to that, in London too. And the leadership journey had, its ups and downs, as many of them do, and all of them do, I guess. But for me, it has been one where values have been really important to me. I've had to work in organisations where my values have felt aligned to the organisation's values, and that's what I've been lucky enough to do. If we could go on to the next... Oh, should I be doing the clicker? Sorry. I should be doing this, shouldn't I? Sorry, rather than delegating. There you go. So that was what I was meant to be standing behind, just to explain a bit about me. This is not me at the Harry Styles concert, but this is me at Pride. But I do have a feather boa on, and I hope I didn't drop too many feathers all over Cardiff when I was marching the other week. And this is me as the Chief Executive of Cwmpas, or the Wales Cooperative Centre as it was then. So just one other thing about leadership, and I guess my career experience that I wanted to share, was how I feel, for me, allyship has been incredibly important to my confidence in the workplace, certainly in the early years. So I was born and brought up in Cwmbran, and I knew I was gay, but I knew I could not live and work in Wales at that time. That's what I felt as a gay man. I just felt I couldn't be successful or happy working in Wales at that time. So all I wanted to do was to move out of Wales and move to London. And that's what I did, ending up working in local government in London and Brussels. But what was so powerful for me in those early years was the allyship shown to me by others working in that environment. And I wouldn't have termed it allyship in those days, but it was a culture that meant I felt included, that people gave cultural signals that meant I could feel that I could be myself in the workplace and therefore have the confidence to know I was accepted and to be able to make a contribution to that workplace. And they were signals that were often quite small, actually, or, perhaps other people wouldn't have noticed it. So one of the things I really remember is people talking about their partners. They were heterosexual couples, but they would talk about partners rather than husband and wife as a way of not revealing gender so that I could talk about my partner without having to out myself necessarily in an environment that I didn't want to. I also saw people changing policies in that workplace in terms of adoption, so that same-sex couples could be able to, have adoption leave if they wanted to adopt. And other people were campaigning for that who were not LGBT, who were not me, but were allies that were supportive of equality and diversity within that workplace. And it stood out to me as I was thinking about doing this presentation as being a really important foundation for my confidence and my career. And I've always remembered that. And lo and behold, 10 years later, I was to come back to Wales, just 10 years later actually, and be the first person employed by Stonewall Cymru and set up the office in Wales and make a successful and happy career in Wales. So for me, it's such a quick turnaround that happened, but that allyship was really important. It was great actually as I was coming here, there was a Llandilo Pride event going on, a Pride event in Llandilo, which would never have happened all those years ago, and fantastic to see how Wales has changed. But that allyship was crucially important to me and gave me that confidence, as I say. And I've tried to show allyship to others from minority groups, from groups that are discriminated against in leadership positions and as a colleague in all the roles that I've done ever since, because I think it can be so powerful. It might be subtle, it might be small, but it can be really powerful in motivating and making people feel included. So I thought I'd share that little bit of something that's been important to me in my career. Okay, so my job as Future Generations Commissioner, it's about being an ally to future generations. Nice link, isn't it? I thought it worked. It's about being an ally to future generations. So what we're here to do with our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is not to think about just the here and now, but to be acting today for a better tomorrow. So be thinking about the future and the future of our country while we're transforming our public services. It is something that many countries around the world look to Wales because we've got this important legislation, which requires us as public servants to think about the well-being of future generations, to think about long-term when we're going about our work. So effectively, what this means is not putting sticking plasters on things only for us to have problems to face generations down the line. It doesn't mean not doing anything to address today's problems. It means thinking about today and future generations to come in all that we do so that we avoid the problems that might be coming down the track. My job as the Future Generations Commissioner is to advise and support public bodies. So if you work in 44 of the public bodies in Wales, local authorities, health boards, NRW, devolved public bodies, will be 52 institutions from April next year. This Act applies to you and how you should be working. And my job is to support, advise, monitor, assess progress and review progress where it's not taking place and make recommendations for improvements. So this is what you legitimately hear from people already when I'm going about my role. Why are we thinking about future generations when we need to be focused on current communities? We are dealing with a cost of living crisis. We can't be spending projects on money on future projects. Our ancestors didn't think of us. Why should we be doing things differently? These are legitimate questions, and many of you will be facing really difficult problems in terms of how you manage public services and deliver on the demands faced by you in the current context. So my job, I really feel, is to be alongside you in that context, in supporting public bodies to think now and for the future. Because if we did start to think about future generations, perhaps we wouldn't have been facing the problems and the challenges that we're facing now. So if we'd been thinking about the environment when we knew fossil fuels were a problem 40, 50, more than that years ago, we would have been closer to net zero than we are now, or maybe having achieved it. Even if you think about the cost of living crisis and the impact that it's having, if we'd been insulating our homes, building more affordable homes, supporting people with good quality jobs in a way that perhaps we should have done more of, tackling poverty, we wouldn't be facing the challenges that we are now. Similarly, those of you, I think there's a lot of you working in the NHS or in healthcare, if we'd been putting money into healthcare budgets that were about prevention, we wouldn't perhaps be facing the problems that we are now in terms of the demand on our health services. So it's crucially important that we move in front of this, we get ahead of this, we look at prevention and we look long term so we safeguard future generations from having similar problems when they're managing public services. Now this, I don't know if you've seen this before. This is in Los Angeles, I think. It's by a sculptor called Kay. And I think it really illustrates how we are responsible for handing on the planet. We're handing on the responsibility to future generations. And it's our job to make sure that that planet and that Earth is in good shape when we pass that on. It really is our responsibility to be thinking about future generations. In answer to the question about our ancestors didn't do this, they didn't really think about future generations when they were doing their work. Well, we're better informed now. We don't have that excuse. We're better informed about what the future holds. We know we can project in a more advanced way about what's likely to happen than they were previously. So we don't have that excuse not to act. We have the information, we have the ability, and we need to take the opportunity to be acting. This is about saying that this is closer than you think. So when you might be thinking future generations, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking grandchildren, great-grandchildren. But they say that the first person first woman that is going to live to 150 years, maybe longer, has already been born. So we're talking about maybe your children, people already on the planet that we are taking action for. This is closer than we think. And so this woman, who may live to 150 years, is going to have a really tough time of it if we don't act. You know, the planet and the situation facing this woman and women like her who live to this amount of time will be difficult, will be challenging unless we act now. And we may not even have a planet to live on. So we absolutely need to be thinking about this now. It's not something we can postpone. We've postponed things for too long. So I said a little bit about the fact that we can think about the future and we can project, I think is the word, into the future more than we've been able to do in previous times. So this Future Trends report tells you about the mega trends. It's from the UN, and it tells you about the mega trends facing society, which we can be pretty sure are happening and certainly need to be taking into account in our decision making. And this, information can be incredibly useful and practical to people working in public services to start to think about what they might need to be thinking, what we all need to be thinking about when we're taking our decisions. I think some of this is perhaps straightforward, in terms of demographic shift or in terms of climate change. They're perhaps obvious to you in terms of what we need to be thinking about. But when they're talking about governance and technology, they're particularly talking about access to technology. Access to technology, COVID vaccine, for example, being a prime example about how that will affect outcomes when some people, some populations, some countries have access to technology, which is going to be able to safeguard their populations and other countries don't. When we're talking about values, and you may or may not agree with this, but the research says, the experts say, we need to be thinking about the values of young people being quite different from the values of our generation and taking different choices. And what does that mean about public services? What does that mean about how we spend our money? So thinking about the values and how values are likely to change over time and what that means for our decision making is one of the mega trends that the UN talks about in thinking long term. The other one, and I hope this is the case, is about the economy. And something that I've campaigned for in many years when I was working at Compass is a different way of thinking about the economy. And they sense at the UN level that we're starting to think economically very differently. No longer just focused on GDP and on growth, because we can't continue to be growing the economy and exploiting our natural resources until there's nothing left. We need to be thinking much more in line of a well-being economy and an economy that works for us rather than one that works for big business. So more looking into the future. These are the top 10 long-term risks. And this is from the World Economic Forum. So if you know the World Economic Forum, these are the Davos guys that go skiing and, prime ministers and all that lot go to, I think, in January or definitely in the winter, of course. And this is how they see the long-term risks facing the country and the world. And I think one of the interesting things from that is looking at what's in green. Is it 6 of the factors are environmental factors? Different aspects of environmental problems, climate change, failure to mitigate climate change, failure to adapt to climate change, biodiversity loss. But the significant number of those are about the environment. And so, thinking through climate change and the nature emergency is absolutely essential to what we do in all of our practice all the time, and we need to have that at the top of our agenda. So, forgive me those that said you were very familiar with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. You can have some coffee now and look away, but this is a few slides to tell you about our world-leading Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It really is seen around the world as world-leading, and in fact, the UN has talked about it and is looking at a special envoy for future generations and a declaration for future generations. I didn't realize how much interest there would be in my role until I started 4 months ago. So people have their eyes on Wales when they think about the well-being of long-term thinking and future generations thinking. I think I was at an event, the First Minister was speaking at an event the other day, and actually he said one of the first or second things he's asked about when he goes abroad is the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which is it's kind of crazy, isn't it, that people know Wales for sort of the legislation that we have. I think rugby and football is, up there as well. But this legislation is something that is really known about around the world. So something to be hugely proud of in our society and in the work we do. And this is what it's about. So it's about, as I've been saying, acting in a manner which ensures that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's all about sustainable development. It came in place in 2015 and it's been in operation for 8 years now. And we have these 7 well-being goals, which set out a vision for the country that we want to reach. How many other countries do you think have well-being goals and a vision for the country they want to see in 50 years' time? Does anyone know of any other country? I don't know of any other country that has this. Maybe some do, but I've not come across them in my role so far. So we have a direction, a vision of the country that we want to shape and create. And we are all working, or meant to be working, in the direction of meeting these 7 well-being goals. And that doesn't matter, these apply legally to the public sector, but they're also being applied and adopted voluntarily by the third sector. That, as I've said, that's my background, but also by the business sector too. I was staggered by the numbers of businesses that are really interested in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and are voluntarily looking at the goals and how they apply them to their work. And they're actually quite interesting in themselves. So do take a chance to have a look at them if you ever want to, because they don't talk about things, it's not all motherhood and apple pie. It is saying about a country that we want to create that will be different from the vision that other countries will want to create. So if you look at, where is it? A Prosperous Wales there at the top, which is about the economy and how we shape the economy. It doesn't mention GDP. It doesn't mention growth. It talks about a low carbon society and operating within our means. It talks about fair work. So it is a really interesting narrative for how we want to be as a country and the vision we've set ourselves for the country we want to be. There are also 50 well-being indicators which are being measured on a day-to-day basis to tell us how we're doing in meeting those goals. And I'd be interested later on in understanding how many of you use those actively in your work and how useful they are in understanding what's working and what's not working. But those 50 measures are crucial. If you don't measure things, they don't happen. So we measure what we're doing and the progress that we're making against the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the 7 Wellbeing Goals. And this takes us on to the ways of working, which are basically what needs to be applied to deliver. So as public servants, we are meant to think about these 5 ways of working in all that we do and apply them to the delivery of our work. And I think these are really the engine for the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. This is what you can really see when you see whether public bodies are applying the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. They are not looking at one of those areas. They're not just looking at prevention, or they're looking at how they involve their citizens, but they're looking at all 5 of those ways of working and applying them to their thinking, their strategic planning, and the development of services and the delivery of services. They really can bring to life the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act when you see the delivery of public services. I looked recently at 2 plans by public bodies, and those that have applied this effectively, their plans lift off the page. You see the difference, you see the ambition, you see the long term, you see the people that we're working for at the heart of these policies and strategies. So I urge you to take a look at the plans of Natural Resources Wales and Bannau Brycheiniog National Park that also falls under the Act, because they have really effectively applied, in my view, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act to their work. So, how well are we doing? This is one example, I think, of the change that is happening in Wales as a result of us applying the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And I would argue, if it hadn't been for the Act and my predecessor and decisions by the First Ministers and others in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, this change, this important change, would not have happened. So back in 2018-19, looking at building a relief road around Newport would have saddled future generations with a huge amount of debt. Would also have driven a road, put a road across an area of nature that needed to be protected, would have encouraged more cars, would have created more impact on climate, carbon emissions, more cars. But a decision was taken that this road building was not in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And as a result, we're seeing significant change in our transport policy. So if you look at the budget on road spending from Welsh Government, and the Minister will correct me if I've got this wrong, but I think the road building budget in the last Senedd used to be about 2/3 of our budget spent on roads, transport budget, and now 1/3 of it spent on roads. And a huge increase, you can see down the bottom, spent on active travel, so cycling and walking. And we're starting to see this difference, I think, in terms of transport systems and what we're valuing and how we're approaching our transport in Wales. So new transport strategy, a freeze on new road building, and all these things are starting to have a big shift in how we think about transport strategy. But I think what we need to hold on to in all of this stuff is to make sure we focus on the outcome. So it's obviously not good enough to stop road building and say, well, great, we've done the right thing by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But citizens are not able to move around South East Wales in a way that they can access, see friends and family and access work and so forth. We need to keep focusing on the outcomes down here so that mobility challenges, so that people, the economy, so that people can move around freely and affordably in a way that works for them and suits their lives, but in a different way that doesn't also damage the environment and increase climate change. So I think this is I'm really proud of Wales having done this. I had nothing to do with it myself, can't take any credit whatsoever. But I'm really proud that this is the kind of bold and urgent action that we need to be taking as a country to shift our thinking, to be thinking about long term, to be thinking about future generations. Lots of great initiatives, and I've chosen some that are in the public sector and in the third sector here. But you do see real change makers right across the country. This is Amanda Davis, used to work in Swansea Bay Health Board, and looked at a bed poverty relief scheme, thinking about the Wellbeing of Future Generations scheme, Act, thinking about the fact that they bought a lot of beds during the COVID pandemic. What were they going to do with these beds when they no longer needed them? And so she thought more broadly about what they could be used for and the impact they could have. And they were distributed to people in bed poverty in the region. And beds were also sent abroad to support Ukrainian refugees in Moldova, I think, who didn't have a bed to sleep on. She's also been involved in thinking about how hospital land could be used to grow organic vegetables and provide good quality, affordable food for local people in the Swansea area. And for me, that illustrates the cross-collaboration, integration of agendas. It's not just about health, it's about economy, it's about being a globally responsible Wales, it's about collaborating with different sectors to get things done. And it's the kind of innovative, creative thinking that we are all empowered to be doing as a result of this world-leading legislation. I could have a whole slide of these examples from the public sector and the third sector, but I've just chosen two. This is a wellbeing hub in Wrexham that doesn't provide just one service, it provides multiple services, tackles loneliness, provides public services, provides a warm space, I think, for people to go to, delivered by the public sector and the third sector working together. A hugely inspiring place that one of my colleagues went to quite recently and told me about, so I thought I'd share a bit of information about Wrexham's Wellbeing Hub. I know many of you will be involved in all of this kind of thing right across Wales, but obviously we need to be seeing more of it if we're thinking about well-being. A lot of mentions about the One Welsh Public Service and the direction of travel. The Minister has just mentioned the commitment to a One Welsh Public Service and the benefit that it can bring to us as a country. So the detail is being worked out, I know, about how this can be delivered. But what we really have is we have a manual. We have a manual, a cultural manual about how the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act tells us all in the public sector in Wales how we should go about our work. I showed you the 5 ways of working. So the manual provides a real guiding document for how we go forward with the One Welsh Public Service. If we had different approaches in different areas of the public sector, then that would be, you know, much more challenging. But we're lucky to have this one approach that we're all applying that should help creating One Welsh Public Service much easier because we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So I'm going to end shortly, but one of the things I think, whilst being very positive about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, as you've heard, we do have an implementation gap. Our ambition is bold, and that's where it needs to be, but our action and our implementation isn't yet where it needs to be. So there are green shoots, there's huge progress. I showed you the transport example and others that demonstrate what the difference we can make, the bold changes that we can make as a result of thinking about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But we've still got this implementation gap, and I'd be interested in your views. It's not good enough for us to have the best policies in the world if they're not making a difference for the citizens of Wales. So we need to find ways in which we can close that implementation gap and achieve more delivery right across Wales, and understand how you can be empowered, enabled as leaders within the Welsh public sector to be delivering against the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. I don't want to lead the witness in terms of your discussions on the tables later on, but I'm going to give you a sense of some of the things that have been coming to me when I've been going around speaking to the leaders of the public bodies across Wales. It's a real privilege to do this job, and one of the interesting things is about the name of being a commissioner. If I'd written to the 22 local authority leaders as Chief Exec of Compass, you know, 3 of them would have written back, and 1 of them would have agreed to meet. But now I'm called a commissioner. They all wrote back and they all wanted to meet, which is a fantastic privilege, and it was great to be able to hear from them. But they shared some of their concerns and their challenges in terms of the implementation, and that's what we want to get on to in the workshop session, to understand from you, you know, what are the issues in delivering this, and what are the solutions that we can support you with to do more of it. So one of the things was more support around the how, the implementation. So a lot of buy-in for the Act, a lot of buy-in for why we're doing this. People get why we need to think long-term. They get why we need to think about future generations, but they need more support, not just resources, ideas, case studies, training, information, on a day-to-day basis to help with the implementation. They want to know what others are doing so that they can perhaps adopt or apply the same methods in their own areas. So I think we need to do a bigger job in supporting public bodies and you in your roles around the how. We have some incredible and important, perhaps not incredible, we have important collaborative structures in Wales, such as the PSBs, the regional partnership boards, as the Minister was talking about. They are the right structures, and they're important to enable you working in one area of the public sector to be communicating and working together on joint initiatives with other parts of the public sector. But they're not all working as effectively as they could be. What can we do to improve that? How can we help them be more effective in ensuring collaboration across public bodies? What is it that's going to help them to be more effective? I think there's questions around resources, of course, in all of this, and how we find more resources for this agenda, how we find dedicated resources for this agenda. Again, I'm going to the Swansea Bay Health Board as an example, but recently you will have seen a solar farm put in next to Morriston Hospital. Have any of you been involved in that project before I wax lyrical about it and get my facts wrong? Someone in your team has, yeah. So as I understand it, so correct me if I get this wrong, you know, that was done, I think, prior to the cost of living crisis or running up to the cost of living crisis. And it's produced electricity that is now going directly to the hospital and saved the hospital a lot of money that they would have otherwise have spent buying electricity off the grid. But what the press reaction was, I watched one of the news reports, and it might not just been this, but what the press reaction was, how are you spending money on a solar farm when there are ambulances waiting outside the hospital in Morriston and there are waiting lists for 2 or more years for certain treatments? And the hospital was able to say at that time, well, this was dedicated funding to enable us that could only be used for this type of project and wasn't enabling, couldn't be used on direct delivery of health services. And it's those sorts of simple tools, I say they're simple, but they're those sorts of approaches that will enable us, I think, where we're seeing, will enable us to think long-term and think future. But what more do we need to be putting in place to enable more of that to happen? So I'd be really interested in your thoughts and your questions when we come to the table sessions. So this is the question. They're more specific when we get to the tables. But I just urge you to remember the woman or women that will live to 150 years that are already born and who will face a world in crisis, will face a world in polycrisis if we don't act now. So how do we act? What do we need to do to act to ensure a positive and sustainable world for that woman in 150 years? Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much for your time. I will introduce the questions for the session shortly, but I think we may have some time for questions or comments because I'm really keen to hear from you about what you've heard or your experience of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. So, diolch yn fawr. Brilliant, welcome back, and thank you for your participation in the next session. I'm going to hand over to my brilliant colleague, Imogen, who's going to lead us through the next bit.
Yeah, so Prynhawn da. So I'm Imogen, and I work for the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner. I actually replaced Derek as the newest staff member because I am 6 weeks into my role. So we're here, my role is to do with community engagement and really making sure that we're including the voices of everyone that's affected by the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, which is everyone and everyone who's not yet been born. So we really want to make the most of your brains and the people in the room and find out from you what we should be doing and what we should be focusing on. And I'm also really pleased to be here because my previous role that I was doing 6 weeks ago was in social prescribing, which I hope in this room quite a lot of people are familiar with. So that's where people would get referred to me that would need support for things to do with their well-being. So it might be to do with employment, it might be to do with health conditions, it might be just loneliness and isolation. And I would then have to refer them or signpost them to support in public services and in their community. So during the time I was there, so I worked in that role for 2 years, so I got to know very well the different public services and the great support that I could refer people to. And it was when I was planning my leaving dinner and drinks that I realised exactly how many, when I was inviting people from the NHS, from the food bank, from the job centre, and then even the women from the WI got an invite and came along. So we worked with a wide range of different people, and that's sort of what I've really tried to bring into my role now, that I want to make sure that the wide range of people that are using public services and also the people working for public services are getting to feed into our future focus. So our future focus is the listening exercise that the involvement exercise that Derek's been doing since he started and that we've been supporting on. And we're sort of being a bit cheeky and we've brought that with us today. So you're going to be taking part in the exercise and to get your views. So we're going to kick off with a Slido question. And it is a bit of a shame because we are starting on a bit of a negative. but that's how we can make improvements, by finding out what are the issues and what needs to change. So we sort of want to try and find out what's the sort of biggest challenge that you're facing. If you try and use like one word, but if you need a few, that's fine. I can see it's working and it's coming through. I can see that funding's coming up, which actually was something that I spoke to Derek about in the car, about how funding, and especially when we're trying to achieve long-term change, and it's often short-term funding, makes that quite a challenge.
Yeah, it would be even bigger, wouldn't it, if money and funding and resources all came together, which is often budgets, which is often saying the same thing. Although resources are not just about funding. Short-termism, pressures on staff, lack of awareness. Lack of awareness, obviously, is something we can do something about. And one of the things that we are looking at as a team is how we put a more proactive training and information program on for people working in the public sector to understand the legislation and how it can be applied.
Yeah, I think a lot of these issues, so we've been, well, since I've been in my 6-week role, I've been travelling to Narberth, we've been doing events in Grangetown, we've been doing some online events, and I think it is sort of really interesting how a lot of the things, maybe we're hearing them in a slightly different way. So we might hear from trade unions about sort of fair working conditions, but then we hear from other places about sort of retention and recruitment issues, but everyone's almost talking about the same things, but in a different way. I think that's what we're even seeing here today. There are quite a lot of common issues that everyone's sort of feeding back to us.
I'm interested in the ones around engagement and buy-in. I think I saw that a few times. So a sense, I guess, a few people saying, I don't know if it's engagement within the team because of morale or something, or it's engagement with this agenda that's not landing, but it's something for us to think about if that is what you're saying in terms of people understanding why this is important, or not understanding or not buying into why this is important. There's an issue around communications and how we, sell the message of this work. Great. I think that stopped evolving, but that's something we can capture and take away and consider. I guess there's a lot that we've been familiar with and we're hearing throughout the kind of exercises that we're doing, but some of those things I haven't seen in other exercises, so we can take away and look at those. Yeah,
so that was just to sort of get everyone thinking, get it started. So what we're going to do now is, if people can work in your sort of table discussion groups, we've allocated about like 15 minutes to think more about these issues. But what we really want, and what my colleague Pep has asked, is really want to know about the root causes. Are these root causes within your organisation? Are these wider system level root causes? So if people can use the post-it notes, use the flip chart paper, and spend 15 minutes about the issues, and then we'll shout and tell you to move on to the solutions after that.
We're going to take away please write clearly, we're going to take away the post-it notes and the flip chart paper and write it all up. So you don't have to, but if you can write clearly, we'll collect the information and take it home. Thank you.
Okay, you've spoken a lot about the issues, and I heard a lot of good things. I heard someone say that it's a very big act. It's a hell of an act, someone said, which is very true. But now we want to shift the conversation, end today on a bit more of a positive. So we're now thinking about the solutions, and especially the role of the office in helping get those solutions implemented. So if you look on the piece of A4 paper, there's sort of what are the solutions for these issues, and what role should the Office of Future Generations have in supporting public bodies and third sector in getting these issues implemented. And there is, so if you could try and have some time to write about those and focus on those, there is also these case study documents, which if you've got a really good example of where your organisation has implemented the Act, we want to hear about it. I know Claire, who's in the audience, does our comms, and she'd like to promote those and show really good examples, because also that's the way we can share best practice and we can get other people learning from organisations that are doing this stuff already, because we know there's lots of positive things happening out there just not enough of people know about it. So yeah, so if now you've got quite a lot to do in the 15 minutes, if you can think about solutions, how the office can help, but also any case studies. But I think also someone said to me that they're going to put the form on Padlet or some electronic website that you're all using. So if you don't have time to do it today, you can go onto that later and let us know. So yeah, you've got 15 minutes to think solution focused.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I hope you found that interesting and informative. I tried to get around most of the tables, and it was really interesting to hear your views. There's clearly lots of work for us to be doing, certainly in sort of raising awareness, even amongst public sector employees and third sector employees delivering public services, let alone the public as a whole. But, you know, we're on a journey here, and it's hard stuff, this. This is not easy, but it's essential, and we've got to find ways through. You know, as I try to get across in my presentation, we are starting to see the green shoots of the impact of this important law. And even in this room, people were like, oh, I didn't realize that was the reason. But actually, it is having an increasing amount of traction, and increasingly actually being used by the public to challenge decisions that public servants, local authorities and others are making when they think it's not in line with the spirit and the detail of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and thinking long-term, thinking sustainable development. So thank you for your patience, thank you for your time, thank you for your contributions. We will gather all the information together and write it all up, and it will be really useful to us in informing the priorities of our small team and how we continue to work with you in the roles that you do. There's just one final task for you to do. We've got 2 more Slido questions. The first one is a multiple choice. Imogen, do you want to take us through?
Yeah, so we're looking, at the moment, we're sort of looking at training, looking at how we can best help get the Act, support people getting the Act implemented. And one of our colleagues is looking at how they can best help you. So we've got different options that we've thought about that might be helpful. We've set it so that you can pick up to a maximum of 3 things. Feel free to just pick 1 or 2, but you can do up to 3. And then the next question is going to be an open question where you can type in your own ideas. But we couldn't do it all in one. So that's why it's a 2-parter, 2-part Slido.
Great. So if you could just type in up to 3 on there. We've got, as you all have, limited resources, so we need to understand what you find will be most useful in this regard, because we can't do it all. Oh, clear favourite, actually. Toolkits and guides coming through. Great. Really interesting. Interesting that there are a fair number of guides that already exist, which are obviously not reaching the people that need to see them, but more of that practical advice and guidance in documents about how this can be applied within your own organisation, but also fairly level pegging, best practice examples, convening events. And have I got that right? Yeah. Toolkits, guides, best practice examples, convening events, training about the Act. Oh, we can't see the bottom one, can we? Have I got this right? 1, 2, 3. Oh, how did you see that?
Oh, it's down
Oh,
there.
it's on there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's on your phone. Oh, wow. Okay, 25%. Okay, so that's a clear steer. Thank you. Thank you. And the last question, Imogen.
So we've just, the last one is just an open question, just for people to type if there was anything we missed, anything that you know, since you're the experts, that we're sort of asking to get the Act implemented. So if anyone has anything they want to type, that'd be really helpful for us.
Great. So we can perhaps leave that run a bit while we just close. You know, Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much for your time. There is an open consultation that we're running. So for those of you that want to go away and read the legislation and then come back or think about your own areas, it's on our website. It's called Our Future Focus, and it's open until the 3rd of July. and we'd love to have any more ideas and thoughts about what you think we should be doing. We are going to already address some of those things that you've talked about. So we've got a new toolkit coming out actually in September aimed at businesses and understanding how they demonstrate and engage with the legislation so that they can justify it when they're working with public bodies. And we're also looking at developing a training and learning program for public servants. And hopefully many of you will be interested in coming along on that program. But I hear you in terms of training, perhaps more of our focus needs to be on the guide documents, the easy to understand perhaps guides that help you interpret the legislation and apply it to your own areas. So perhaps communicating what we've already got and addressing any gaps is something we can come away to do. So I think that was it in terms of what we needed to cover.
One other thing, if anyone feels like all this stuff is going to feed into our involvement work, but if anyone particularly wants to give a bit more detailed feedback, or maybe someone said to me they wanted to have a little look at the Act, understand the Act a bit more, and then give feedback, we've got a survey that's open until the 3rd of July, which I think is next week. So if anyone wants to go on to, you can type in Future Generations, our Future Focus, or if you go onto our Twitter or Instagram, it'll be on there. So there is a survey that just asks a bit more in depth to get more, you can give a bit more of a longer feedback if anyone would like to.
Thank you. Imogen is, as she said, she's only been with us 6 weeks, and this was a big ask to talk in front of the biggest audience that she's ever done. And she did an amazing job. So thank you, Imogen. Thank you for organising this, but also being brave and coming up and speaking in front of this lot, which is fantastic. So thank you very much for your time. I hope this has improved your understanding and awareness of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, my role and our office. And let's keep that conversation going so we can hear more about how you're experiencing it and how we can work together as the years go on. So thank you very much for your time. Enjoy your rest of this brilliant summer school, and hope to see you soon.